Welcome back to Fight Talk 2021. I want to talk about what we saw this weekend when Canelo Alvarez once again unified the super middleweight division. Let's get to it. All right, guys, there he is. My man Canelo Alvarez took Billy Joe Saunders' WBO title. A lot of people were saying that that was going to be the hardest fight in the super middleweight division. And a lot of people have a lot of opinions on it. There are a lot of haters, as usual, what we see when we see Canelo fights. So I want to touch up on that. I want to touch up on the pound for pound rankings. I want to touch up on the actual fight, the scorecards of the fight, whether or not you guys agreed with the scorecards or whatnot. And then I want to talk about what's next for Canelo and what's next for the foreseeable future with Canelo. And is anybody even going to beat this guy? So let's get right into it. So we look at the pound for pound rankings, right? And after this fight, and after quite a couple fights, so I don't really watch Joe Rogan as much as I used to, and part of it's because of the Spotify thing. I don't really, I like to keep everything on YouTube for the most part. But I saw the clip where he had Russell Peters back on the podcast, and Russell Peters said after the past, well, he said before he was like, I wasn't really a Canelo fan, but after the past five fights, it's pretty much if you're not a Canelo fan, then you're just a hater, and that's really what it is. And Dan Rayfield, the guy from ESPN, which typically I don't really like listening to this guy because if you just Google Dan Rayfield, this dude is like the fattest guy ever, and he just looks like a slob. Sorry if he's like a great guy or a cool guy or anything, but it's hard to take like professional boxing advice or criticisms from a guy who presents himself in that way. But I definitely agreed with one of his recent tweets or whatever. It said, at this point, if you don't think Canelo is the pound for pound number one, you're either just a hater or you're an idiot. And I mean, really, it is. I would say a few years ago, back maybe like 2019, really before he fought Kovalev, right? Because you could be like, oh, he didn't really win the Triple G fight. Oh, he lost the first one, all of that. And whatnot. And then you really look at the picture. A lot of people were saying Lomachenko was number one. I put Terrence Crawford at number one because Terrence Crawford was a three division champion like Lomachenko, except the difference is, first of all, Terrence Crawford's undefeated. And secondly, he was undisputed at 140. So that right there, and they had similar resumes, right? You couldn't really say one was higher than the other. A lot of people even then were saying Canelo's might be number one just based off of the names on his resume, even though he had that draw with Triple G that lost to Floyd Mayweather Jr., etc. But at this point, especially after he went up in weight, knocked out cold Sergey Kovalev, you have to just say that he was number one, and he's just proven it again and again and again. So that's another thing. We got to look at Canelo's accomplishments before we get into the fight, right? We look at his accomplishments. This guy was the unified champ, WBC, WBA at 154. Later, won the WBO. He was the Ring Magazine belt holder, which I think is the most important one out of all of them. I think in the next week or so, I say this all the time, but in the next week or so, I'm going to make a video that kind of describes the politics of boxing because a lot of people, maybe if you're listening to this right now, you think, well, I don't really know about these belts, why there's so many belts and what each individual belt means and why ultimately they're all pretty much BS. But the Ring Magazine one is the number one because they take everybody in the division. If you look, about half of them are vacant, anyways, because you can't really say there's like that one guy that deserves to be the champion in a lot of divisions. But we can cover that in another video. So we look at 154. He was a WBA, WBC champ, unified, along with the Ring Magazine belt holder as well. Later, won the WBO belt. So he had three out of the four belts, including the Ring Magazine, at 154. Then at 160, he's the two-time WBC champion, WBA champion, IBF champion as well. So this guy and the Ring Magazine champion at 160 had won three out of the four belts as well. Now at super middleweight, has 3 out of the 4 belts, including the Ring Magazine. Unify champion as well. He has the WBA, WBC, WBO. He's just missing the IBF. And then at light heavyweight, he went out and knocked out Sergey Kovalev cold, won the WBO belt. So just looking at the accomplishments, and then you go into the resume of who he beat. I mean, there's so many names on there. If you even try to bring up another person and try to compare them, it just doesn't match. So this guy is for sure the number 1 pound for pound fighter in the game. It's not even close. So that being said, let's look at the fight. Let's look at the scorecards because I see a lot of people chatting in the comments, and I love looking at the comments because there's so many casuals in the comments. And let me just describe and explain real quick what a casual is, right? It's not a bad thing to be a casual. A casual is actually a really good thing because you're a casual fan. You're not like entrenched in it, but you tune in for the big fights. You tune in to watch. You look for that excitement, and that's good. That's fine. And that's what we need in the sports because those are the people that really pay the money, not all the purists, right? But the casuals, it's an insult when you try to have a opinion, and you can have an opinion as a casual, but don't go out and talk about it like you really know it. When you start trying to get into debates and tell people they're stupid and all that kind of stuff, you really look like a casual. And I'll bring up some examples of that later on when we get into potential fights for Canelo. So that being said, there was a lot of casuals in the comments talking about, oh, he was up on the score. Billy Joe was up on the scorecards. Canelo, there we go. When they released the scorecards and showed that it was 77 to 75 on one of them, and then 78-74 on the other two. If you don't know what that means that it was 5 rounds to 3. It was stopped after the 8th round. Billy Joe retired, broken orbital. I guess it was good retiring on the stool. A lot of people said he quit, whatever. I mean, yeah, but he had a broken face, so there's not really much you could do about it. This guy was down on the scorecards. Canelo was winning 5 rounds to 3 on one of them, and then 6 rounds to 2 on the other two scorecards, which I thought was fair. And honestly, I gave Billy Joe Saunders 1 round, and that's it. And if this is where people want to chew me up, you want to chew me up in the comments, go ahead. I'll explain it right now. If you look at the scorecards, every judge, and I think the judges were wrong on this, every judge gave the first round to Billy Joe Saunders. Every judge. And every judge gave the 5th round to Billy Joe Saunders. And then one of the judges gave the 7th to Billy Joe Saunders as well. I saw a lot of scorecards that had the 4th. A lot of people, their scorecards having the 4th round going to Billy Joe Saunders. I thought that round was close, but I just don't think he did enough. And before I get into actually, no, you know what? I'll get into the first round. So the first round, it was a big feeling out round, right? We look at the punch stats, and I know the punch stats aren't what designates who wins the round. Once you look at like the harder shots, who was dictating the pace of the round, ring generalship, defense, all these type of things that go into it, really, if you can't decide, I like to think who would I have rather been in that round. And maybe it's a little bit different because some people are like, okay, well, I don't know because I've never boxed. But really, who would you rather have been? You look at who landed the total punches. Canelo Alvarez actually landed more punches in the round. He landed 7 out of 13. Billy Joe Saunders landed 5 out of 28. So he missed, I mean, so many shots. Landed at a 17%. He was jabbing a lot. He was throwing a lot. But Canelo was parrying a lot of those shots. And then when you really look at it, so Canelo landed 3 left hooks to the body. That's one of the worst shots to get hit with. If you ever get hit with a left hook to the body, that is not good. He landed 3 hard ones. There was 2 other times in the first round where Canelo backed up Billy Joe Saunders against the ropes and then landed hard right hands to the body. That's another thing. And when you look at the power punches that Billy Joe landed, it says here that he landed 0. It looked like he landed at least 1 good left hand, and then Canelo immediately countered with an uppercut. So I mean, yeah, he's throwing a bunch of jabs. Watch what Canelo does. He catches a lot of them on the elbows. He parries a lot of them with the gloves. He's able to move out of the way. There was a lot of times, especially towards the end of that round, where he put Billy Joe against the ropes, and then when Billy Joe went to attack, Canelo was all the way back over here. So it was just Canelo being uh, ring generalship was there for him. I think the judges got that one wrong, but I get it. You know what I mean? They're feeling each other out. It's the first round. You give it to the guy who's a little more active, whatever. I thought the fifth round, he definitely won. But all these other rounds, Canelo, there was a couple rounds where Canelo got hit. Yeah. And just because I said I gave one round doesn't mean that I thought Canelo just washed him the whole time. I thought Billy Joe did really, really good. And I thought that's exactly what he was going to do. He was going to do good. But Canelo is so good. And especially with the way he lands his shots, knowing that, okay, you landed two on me. I'm going to land three on you. And I'm going to make the ones that I land sound way harder. And it's going to be just a way better shot so that when I land, you hit me with one, I'm gonna hit you with one back, and but mine is gonna count for more than what yours did. And when you sit here, and if we talk about these rounds where they were close, and if you want to give it to, like, for example, Chris Mannix's scorecard, first of all, let me say that DAZN is really just kind of a poor production, to be honest with you. It really is. DC, a while ago got into it with Sergio Mora, and poor Sergio Mora on this broadcast was trying to kind of defend Chris Mannix's scorecard. Chris Mannix, this is a couple times where it's like, what are you doing? And when you see that he got it so off from the official judge's scorecard, you got to pull him from having that position. There was a time in HBO boxing where, rest in peace, Harold Letterman, this guy was like 82, 83 years old, and they had him doing the unofficial scoring still. And it was like, you kind of felt bad because you were like, is this guy senile? Is he watching the same fight as me right now? There's got to be a time where if you're not doing your job right, you got to pull the guy, because now you're going to have these false narratives out here. And especially from what we've seen before with Canelo scorecards, because he hasn't, and there's some fights where he has been gifted with a bad score, but it goes his way, that we can't have that type of thing, especially for the zone and Eddie Hearn if you're going to be promoting Canelo moving forward. So, anyways, these close rounds, I would rather score for the guy who, and be the guy who's parrying the shots, dodging those jabs when it comes to those jabs, then be the guy and score for the guy that's throwing, just flicking out jabs. I think it shows more to be able to parry those jabs and be able to defend against those and move and slip those than it does just to throw them out. Anybody could throw them, right? My mom could throw seven jabs, eight jabs in a row. But it shows real boxing IQ and boxing skill to be able to parry those and be able to defend against those. And that's what was happening a lot of the times. But for what it was, I think a lot of people thought Billy Joe was going to be Canelo's toughest test, and he was. So that being said, we look forward to who Canelo is going to fight next, and it's obviously Caleb Plant. Caleb Plant has what Canelo wants, and that's the IBF title. So there's the three belts that Canelo has. He needs that last one, and also Caleb Plant is over with Premier Boxing Champions Al Heyman and Fox and Showtime. So he's on a completely different network. Normally, with boxing politics, this is a fight that would take a lot to get made. But Canelo is a free agent. So when people try to say, oh, he's ducking fights, this and that, no, he's not. He is a free agent now, so he can fight whoever, and that's exactly what he's doing. From the second that he became a free agent, before he went back to the zone with Eddie Hearn in his corner for it, promoting him, he was in talks with Caleb Plant before he fought for the WBC WBA. But the reason why I think he didn't go that route was because back when he was at 160 and he had the IBF, the WBA, the WBC, he won the IBF from Danny Jacobs, right? Excuse me. He won the IBF from Danny Jacobs. And within like a week of him winning it on May 4th of 2019, they mandated him to fight Sergey Derevianchenko for that IBF title and defend against him by August 4th. First of all, that's only a couple months away. Why are you going to tell Canelo what to do? So then he was just like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm fighting in, usually he fights in September around Mexican Independence Day weekend. He was probably going to fight Andrade for the WBO, and they ended up stripping him. And that's the second time that the IBF has stripped the title. They stripped Triple G one time because he didn't defend against Derevianchenko in enough time. But on this instance, Derevianchenko had already lost to Danny Jacobs. So this guy was coming off of an L, and now these guys want to mandate him and tell him what to do. So that's the reason why I think he's saving this one for last. And if this fight doesn't get made, it is 100% because of Al Heyman, because of Premier Boxing Champions, and because they want to keep that belt or they just don't want that fight to be made. Make no mistake about it, because Canelo wants that fight. And if that fight doesn't get made, the only other fight that PBC can even justify, if so, is Plant versus Benavidez, because they also have Benavidez in their stable. And that's another thing that I was going to say as well, is that if it's once Canelo fights and let's say he beats Caleb Plant, because even Benavidez came out recently and said that he thinks that Canelo's body shots are just too much, that Plant is susceptible to those body shots, so he might be hit by those body shots. I think that there's only really one other fight at super middleweight, and that's Benavidez, because Benavidez was the two-time WBC champion. And ironically, he's the guy who, I think, the only guy to be stripped of the WBC super middleweight title twice because he missed weight both times. So if Benavidez can make the weight and then fight Canelo, then we'll see. Because of course people are gonna be like, "Oh, he's ducking Benavidez, ducking Benavidez." I don't think he's ducking Benavidez. Benavidez just has no leverage. He has nothing for Canelo. Benavidez really should have been the mandatory back when Avni Yildirim was, but I think because he missed the weight, WBC is like, okay, we're just gonna drop him from. I think they dropped him from the rankings because you missed the weight, you got stripped. So I get it. I mean, WB should have never done that in the first place. But we'll talk about that next week or whatever when I go into this belt rant, right? So we look at that super middleweight division, and that's really where that stands. It's funny. I was like I say, I read the tweets, or not the tweets, but the comments on Instagram. Look at this one from Lionel Vaz. He's avoiding Benavidez at all costs, the same way he avoided Charlo. He can beat Plant, but Canelo is not as good as people say. He avoids people that can beat him. This guy is fighting everyone and anyone. Really, back in the day, when he was fighting at the Canelo weight of 155, they were saying that he was shaking in his boots, afraid to move up to 160. They said that, oh, he doesn't even want to move up to 160. Then he fought Chavez Jr. at 164, jumped up 10 pounds between one fight, fought Triple G twice, fought Danny Jacobs at 160, then went up to 168 for no reason, then went up to 175 to fight and knock out Kovalev, and now is campaigning actively the unified champion, fighting all of the best fighters at super middleweight. You tell me right now, anybody, please, in the comments, one person that is better than Canelo Alvarez at super middleweight. At super middleweight, nobody. I mean, you could try and say Benavidez is better, but who has Benavidez beat? Darrell? I mean, come on, bro. Come on. That's the only person that maybe we could even have we could entertain the debate, but no one else. So then we move on to the middleweights, right? So because that's what we're talking about now. There's so many people online, and the thing is, I get it, because a lot of the times I see people, they talk about, for example, this guy Mambo King 136. Okay, whatever, BS fight. Fight Charlo or Andrade. Tired of watching Canelo roll these bums. These bums are literally the best in the whole division, at a division higher than Charlo and Andrade. But what I see a lot of the times, maybe it's like some dudes from New York or this and that, but it's a lot of like African American fans, black boxing fans, um, rooting black fighters on, and that's cool, bro. I get it. Look at me. I'm a ginger rooting for Canelo, so it makes sense. So if those are the guys you want to root for, that's cool. But you have to, but you can't just completely dog Canelo. Like when you look at Charlo, like look at Andrade. So Andrade goes up there and gets completely clowned by. Anyways, or Andrade goes up there, gets completely clowned by Canelo in English. I don't think anybody really saw that coming. I don't think he saw that coming. He comes up, oh, I'm a big fan. Canelo goes, yeah, I know. Yeah. Oh, you're a boring fighter. You don't fight nobody. And it's true. The guy doesn't fight anybody. The guy has no leverage over Canelo. The only time that he did was when Canelo had the three belts and he had the WBO. But then after IBF stripped him, he goes, okay, well, I'll just go fight, Sergey Kovalev. I think he still had the belt, but he went and fought Sergey Kovalev. So, I mean, what does this guy have for him? Andrade has had opportunities for big fights. Triple G is also with DAZN. But when has he ever, and Triple G's the IBF champion now. So when has he ever called for a unification fight against Triple G? I don't see it. He fought Liam Williams, which is the top of the top level guy that he's fought yet to date, and still is ranked number 10 at super middleweight, or at middleweight, excuse me, by Ring Magazine. And he got beat up in several rounds. He won the fight, but there was a lot of times where he was hurt in that fight. And let me tell you too, when they say that he's boring, he is. It's one of those things. Once you see like a one boring fight from him, you're like, oh man. People know me as a boxing fan and as a fight fan. When especially like if Canelo's fighting, there could be a fire in the kitchen, and I'm watching the fight. I'm sitting there right there. People are like, "Oh, bro, it's my birthday. Like, come on, let's go out." And I'm like, "Yo, sorry, bro. The fights are on. Like, I'm watching the fights, bro. Have your birthday on a Friday or a Saturday or a Sunday, because on Saturday night I'm. But I'm telling you right now, when it's Boo Boo and Andrade fighting, I'm like, man, I might as well just put on Netflix. To be honest, why am I gonna watch this guy? But anyways, maybe if the plant fight doesn't get made, Canelo will just be like, "Hey, I'll shut you up. Come up to super middleweight." But he's not even making moves at 160. He sure's ain't gonna do nothing at 168. But I guess we'll see it, right? And then you look at Charlo. Charlo is a good fighter, but since he's moved up from 154, he hasn't done nothing, bro. He received Canelo's belt by email. He's an email champ, just same way Haney is. People are saying, "Oh, Teofimo's not the real champ. Haney is." No, he was gifted that belt, right? Literally, it's a paper champ. Not even, they call him an email champ because he received the email saying, "Hey, now you've been elevated to champion." And who has he defended it against? Dennis Hogan. I mean, like, he's defended against nobody. This guy fought Matt Korobov, and I mean, he got beat up in that fight. That was the same night that his brother lost to Tony Harrison in that decision. And I thought Jermall lost worst against Korobov, but he ended up getting the decision. His biggest fight at 160 has been against Derevyanchenko, but this is after Derevyanchenko's already suffered two losses. So, I mean, what is that, especially in boxing? It says something about somebody mentally when it's like, okay, I've already been there for the title, I lost it. Okay, I got my second shot at the title, I lost it again against Triple G. Danny Jacobs, Triple G. Now against Charlo. Charlo had the best performance against him, but that was after two losses. But who knows, right? But he was also talking in talks recently to move up and fight Benavidez. They had some sort of beef going on, but it didn't happen. And then now he's fighting another person who people are like, okay, why are you doing this again? It's almost the same thing as Gervonta Davis. How he's fighting people that you're like, all right, you look good, but not really. And then Charlo hasn't even really looked that good. The younger Charlo, actually the one with the loss, Jermell, is looking really good lately. He came after that loss against Harrison, he came back with a vengeance against Harrison. Then he went immediately to unify the division against Jason Rosario, murked him with a body jab, had this guy convulsing on the ground. And then now he has three belts and is going to unify in undisputed against the WBO champ. Mad respect to Jermell. But Jermall right now, I mean, mad respect to him too because he's a great fighter. But people can't say, and it's not his fault because he even came out and said, "Yeah, Canelo's that guy. Like, I'm down to fight Canelo, Triple G, whatever. Like, I got to make these fights," but he's just not making them. So So tell your promoter that those are the fights you want because we're not seeing it, right? And then when you look at 160, it's like okay, maybe Triple G, but the thing is there's already the built-in excuse because if that fight even happens, it would have to fight. It would have to happen immediately, or else Triple G is going to be like 39. Then everyone's going to say because then Canelo's going to murk him at this point with how much better Canelo's gotten since those two fights. He's gonna trash him, especially at 168, and people are just going to say, "Oh, Triple G's old. Triple G's old. He's old." So they're just going to write that off. I mean, maybe they'll use it, but it'll bring out more Canelo haters out of the woodworks. I think maybe at 168 we might see like a Chris Eubank Jr., but maybe, especially with Eddie Hearn being the promoter. But Chris Eubank Jr. is going to have to do something too. So we'll see what happens. Really, I think we got Caleb Plant up next to unify in an undisputed title. Then maybe Benavidez, maybe Chris Eubank Jr., possibly a Charlo, a Triple G, or an Andrade. That's 6 fights that potentially Canelo has, and that's just talking about super middleweight and middleweight. Really, in the long run, if he wants to, he can move back up to 175. Um, Eddie Hearn talked about it too. He said, "Hey, after he unifies his division, he might go up to 175." I think so. There's 3 active champions right now, 175. There is the WBO champion and Dimitri Bivol. The Did I say WBO? I meant WBA. Whatever. The WBA, the WBO, and Joe Smith Jr. He just won that, and then the IBF WBC Unified Champion Artur Beterbiev, and that guy's a problem. I think Bivol, especially if you watch his last fight, he fought somebody who was just on like the British level of competition, and he looked really good and really sharp the first couple rounds. But then after that, was getting tagged, and it was one of those things where you think, okay, if he fought Canelo, it might be a close fight on the decisions. It might be like a 7-5 fight, or maybe even a 8-4. But I think Canelo would end up edging that fight. And I think the same thing for Joe Smith, because I think Joe Smith is a really hard puncher. I think he's a really rugged fighter, really, blue collar worker. But Canelo's just so much better that I think he wins both of those fights. But this is one of those things where who knows? I mean, they might not even be champion. They might go and fight Beterbiev to unify again the titles with at least one of those titles. And then once that happens, I mean, we're talking about maybe 2, 3 years down the line because Canelo has so many potential fights not at 175 that why would he go risk fighting one of these guys at 175 when he did it against Kovalev and everybody like hated on him for it. So, we'll see what happens, but I think that might be kind of like the peak of his career. Something that when Andre Ward did it, but I mean, we're talking about Canelo, who was coming up from 154, started his career at 147, really, as a kid fighting in Mexico. But yeah, I mean, that's really all I got to say. I know it's a lot to say, and I could probably go on for even longer, but I don't want this video to be that long. But what do you guys think? Do you think? I mean, who would you want to see him fight next? Really, if you're saying anybody other than Caleb Plant, then you really don't know what you're talking about. I'm sorry. You better have a really, really good explanation for, and I'll hear you out on it. But it's got to be Caleb Plant, and then we can talk about some other guys. But you know, that is what it is. So, what do you guys think? Let me know. Until next time.